Hello everyone, and welcome back to another graphic novel collection video. Um, I love doing these. I know it's not quite January yet. Maybe I'll wait to upload this a few days. But as of my recording this, I believe it's like the 15th of December. So anyway, the 14th of December actually. This is my graphic novel collection for the year of 2019. I hope you enjoy it, so stick around. I know this is not a graphic novel or anything, but this is a really recent acquisition I got. This is Amazing Spider-Man number 194, the first appearance of Black Cat. And I can do a video on some of my signed books in the future if you want, but I'll go over a few of them briefly. I've got Black Cat number 1 here, signed by the author Jed MacKay, who's living in Halifax, which is where I'm from. Very nice guy. I have Man Without Fear here, a variant edition signed by Jed MacKay. Also, I have this custom art, this commission done by Nick Bradshaw, who drew Spidey and drew Venomized and draws the variant covers for Fantastic Four right now. He's a really good artist. I like his style a lot. Down here I have Ultimate X-Men number 1, signed by Adam Kubert with a certificate of authenticity on the back. I have Edge of Spider-Geddon number 1, or just, I guess, drawn, or rather, signed by Jed MacKay. And I have the Amazing Spider-Man Volume 4, number 1, which is the Halifax variant cover, which I, like, it's important to me because it's the city I'm from. And it's a city I love. Anyway, that's Spider-Man fighting Electro on the Old Town Clock in Halifax, signed by the cover artist Nick Bradshaw. So anyway, I'm gonna actually get into the graphic novels now, starting over with the OHCs, that is the oversized hardcovers. We have Avengers Extinction. There's not a whole lot I have to say about this book. There's a really cool moment in issue 4 where Cable's like, he's looking at Spider-Man and he's like, wow, it's hard to believe that in the future his legacy is being the greatest superhero who ever lived. It's like, oh, that's a really nice moment. Spider-Man, for all the crap he goes through, for everything he suffers, someday he'll go down in history as the greatest superhero to have ever lived. And that's certainly not the only future where Spider-Man earns that reputation. I guess I should probably take this off for a sec. Next we have Avengers Endless War by Warren Ellis. Warren Ellis, buddy, you can do better. I'm sure people do enjoy this book. I don't. I didn't like it. I found it dreadfully boring, and I didn't find the characters to be very likable in this book. But whatever. It's there. It's an oversized hardcover. It looks good on a shelf. Next I have The Invincible Iron Man by Matt Fraction, oversized hardcover volume 2. I got this for $4, so I'm like, I'm not going to turn that down, even though I don't have volume 1. Like, it looks fantastic, and it's Matt Fraction Iron Man, so like, an oversized hardcover this size, are you going to get that for $4? Next, courtesy of... Oh, I killed Flash again. Courtesy of In-Stock Trades, I have the 2 volumes of the Clone Saga. I've read this one to completion. I'm currently reading this one. These books get too much flack. Obviously, there's a lot of crap in them. Like it's peppered with garbage throughout. But there's a lot of like good stories and good character moments and good character studies in these books. And I think that goes overlooked because simply people are really fucking mad about the characters they like and how like the retcons in those books. But the fact of the matter is, like, only one of those retcons ever stuck, and that was like the Norman Osborn retcon. And that's led to some great stories since. I think Norman Osborn is more interesting when he's dead, as like a thing Spider-Man dealt with, as the thing that died. But nonetheless, there have been some good Green Goblin stories since then. But yeah, no, people frown on the Clone Saga more than they probably should, more than it deserves, because of the stuff that made them really angry, and that's all they remember about it. And that's fair enough because the Clone Saga was like 25 years ago, so it's not it's pretty easy to forget the good things about it, like the artwork, for example, and the majority of this Clone Saga was excellent. You got Tom Lyle, who's died recently, unfortunately. You've got Mark Bagley. Like, need I say more? Mark Bagley. You got Sal Buscema, who's an excellent artist as well. You got John Romita Jr., and I love John Romita Jr. and Shut Up, and he's awesome. And yeah, there's some really good material in there. I love Ben Reilly. He's introduced in these books. A lot of people don't like Ben Reilly out of spite, but I like Ben Reilly. He came in a time when Spider-Man was in a darker place. Spider-Man wasn't being treated the way perhaps he should have been by the writers, and he showed us that what it means to be Spider-Man. That even though everything else had a tonal shift in the 90s, you didn't have to be that way. There's a sort of purity in Ben Reilly. He's sort of like the purest version of Spider-Man in a way. But anyway, not the purest version of Spider-Man. Like, I just mean like he's more like a bare bones version of Spider-Man is what I mean. I'm not trying to diss Peter Parker. Obviously, he's my favorite character. Amazing Spider-Man Family Business. It's a really solid book. I'm not going to go through all these books like this, by the way. I just some of the Spider-Man stuff I'll spend a little more time on, perhaps, because I love Spider-Man. But yeah, Amazing Spider-Man Family Business, really good. Introduces Spider-Man's sister. Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus, Volume 1, for which they would never make a second volume. At least one that takes place right after this. They did the Miles Morales Omnibus, which fell apart in most people's cases, and the Death of Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus. But I'd really like to see a second volume of the Omnibus, but I don't think we're going to get one because this was printed like 8 years ago or something like that. Maybe 6 to 7 years ago. Anyway, this is excellent stuff. This is one of my favorite creative teams in comic books. Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley. Mark Bagley is my favorite artist. Brian Michael Bendis around this era would have been one of my favorite writers, but he's fallen off a little bit for me. Especially now that he's writing Superman, and that book's not very good if you ask me. Anyway, this is awesome. This is like quintessential Marvel Comics, and I totally recommend reading that. It's excellent. We have Superior Foes of Spider-Man. I've read a little bit of this. I've not finished it yet. I just got this fairly recently, a few months ago. This is by Nick Spencer and Lieber. What's his first name? Forget. Steve Lieber, that's his name. I believe is the brother of Stan Lee. And drew the Sunday Comics edition of Spider-Man with him. Next we have Thor: God of Thunder, the complete series 1 through 25 in oversized hardcover. This is the Jason Aaron stuff everybody talks about. I read the first couple issues. I'm reading a lot of stuff right now, so I'm not necessarily like too hasty with it, but I really enjoyed what I read so far. It's interesting, and I never thought I'd be that intrigued by a Thor comic because I'm just not a Thor guy. X-Men No More Humans, I haven't read it. It's an original graphic novel. I hear it's pretty good. Next we have Justice League International Omnibus. This is excellent. I love this. I love everything about this. I love the cast. I love the writer. I love the artist. I love everything about this book. It's great. Batman Code of the Owls, an instant classic of the time, 2011. Even back then, it was like an immediate classic, and we're still talking about it today. And it's one of the most revered stories in recent Batman history, if not the most. Justice League by Jeff Johns. I like Jeff Johns. I don't like Jeff Johns' Justice League. I haven't forced myself to read Throne of Atlantis yet. I imagine it's got to be better than the first 2 volumes because it's about Aquaman, and I adore Jeff Johns' Aquaman. But I read these 2 volumes here. What the hell? Oh, my Watchmen pin fell. I was fine with this one. I was dreadfully bored with this one, which is something that you should never have in a Justice League book. You should never be bored by Justice League. Next we have Superman, New Krypton by Jeff Johns. I really like that book. I like Superman a lot. I like Jeff Johns a lot most of the time. Watchmen by Alan Moore. I don't think I really have to say much about that book. I think everybody knows what's going on there. Next we have Marvel Masterworks The Defenders. I really like this era of Defenders. It doesn't get very much attention, probably because most people don't remember it. I can't imagine it sold tremendously well at the time compared to other titles. But I like it a lot. I like the cast. Iron Man, Demon in a Bottle, need I say more? The last 2 issues of this are quintessential Iron Man, and the rest of it is also enjoyable. But really, you could probably skip the first 6 or 7 issues of this volume, because the Demon in the Bottle arc itself really only lasts a couple of issues. Next, we have Ultimate Iron Man Volume 1. What a mess. What a weird book that is. Yeah, it's just a weird book. Ultimate Iron Man. I have a quest to collect every Ultimate comic ever. I have a lot of it. I have a lot of the stuff in singles, but obviously I've got a long way to go. Spider-Man Election Day. That's just fine. You know, it's pretty decent. I don't know if I'd say you need to read it at all, but it's pretty decent from what I recall. I haven't read it in a few years. Ultimate Spider-Man Volume 1 of the second numbering volume. The World According to Peter Parker. This is good material. You should read all of Ultimate Spider-Man because it's excellent. Ultimate Spider-Man never gets bad, which is astonishing because it ran for so long. But yeah, Young Marvel Man Classic Volume 1. This is interesting. This is sort of like, there's a sort of trend of characters who shout their names in order to, or characters that shout a magic word in order to change into an adult. This is fairly interesting. I haven't read all this yet, but I am sort of interested in the history of Marvel Man and Young Marvel Man. I got this for $4, and it's awesome in that we really don't see this kind of material reprinted very often. So I'm glad to have that, especially in hardcover. Next we have Ant-Man Scott Lang. This is some really fun material that people don't talk about very much. I recommend you get this one. I don't know if it's still in print because it was printed back in 2015. You might be able to get it on Amazon still, but I can't imagine you'll find it on many store shelves. But yeah, no, I totally recommend that. That's really cool. This is The Irredeemable Ant-Man by Robert Kirkman. This only lasted 12 issues, but it's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of funny characters in it. It also is really dark and introspective, and I recommend it. It's quite good. Another one, another Ant-Man book. This is Ant-Man Volume 1, Second Chance Man. This is the whole series, by the way. It only lasted 5 issues and a bonus issue. This is by Nick Spencer. It's also really good. I recommend reading that. There's a shift in character of Scott Lang between these 2 books, and I'm annoyed by Spencer's lack of consistency. He doesn't sort of seem to care very much about how Scott was written before, but whatever, it's still good. Earth's Mightiest Heroes, complete collection or ultimate collection. This collects the 2 miniseries from 98 or something like that. Earth's Mightiest Heroes and Earth's Mightiest Heroes 2. It's basically a throwback series to the basic core cast of Avengers from the 70s. New Avengers by Brian Michael Bendis and drawn by Finch and Steve McNiven. I love Steve McNiven. He's also from Halifax, and his artwork is awesome. And Bendis is great at writing teen books, or at least he was at Marvel during this time. New Avengers is great, and I absolutely recommend reading it. It's fantastic. Avengers The Initiative Complete Collection. This is the fallout of Civil War with Hank Pym and Tony Stark and the Mighty Avengers and stuff like that. This is interesting, but you don't have to read it. Next we have Ultimates. This is the first series of Ultimates. They are basically just the Ultimate Avengers. This is pretty good. It's dated. It's ironically because it's supposed to be a modernization of comics. It's a little dated, but I recommend it. It's pretty fun, and the art is fantastic. Brian Hitch drew that. This is Cataclysm, The Ultimate's Last Stand. This is also really good. It's one of the few Ultimates events that actually turned out well. I recommend this as well. Road to Civil War and Civil War, drawn by Steve McNiven. I like Civil War, and Road to Civil War is really interesting. Obviously, quintessential Daredevil. This is Daredevil, the Man Without Fear by Frank Miller and John Romita Jr. Like, what more can you say? If you haven't read it, just, what are you doing? What are you doing? Go read that. Next we have some really classic Daredevil by Roy Thomas and Stan Lee and stuff like that. And Gene Colan, who's an excellent artist, and you should look at some of his artwork because he draws a really mean Daredevil, and I love it. Daredevil Parts of a Whole. This is the first appearance of Echo. This is by Joe Quesada and Mac. It's pretty good. I'm not a fan of Joe Quesada's artwork in general, as a general rule, but I like this quite a bit. Next we have Daredevil the Ultimate Collection. This is the Brewbreaker Collection, Volume 1. I haven't finished this because I read about half of this, and it's quite good, but I want to go back and read the Bendis stuff that takes place right before it for more context. I'll try to go a little bit faster now. I have the complete collection of Mark Waid's Daredevil. That is to say, the first volume of Daredevil he wrote. Really excellent stuff. This is before he went off the deep end. This is really excellent and emotional, and it's awesome and swashbuckling and grand, and it's I love it. I love it a lot. Next we have Daredevil Man Without Fear by Jed MacKay. This is signed as well. I'm not going to open up the book because I don't want to pull it off the shelf every 2 seconds. Because I'm about to pull out another book that's signed. Daredevil No Fear, as in to No Fear, by Chip Zdarsky. This is awesome. This is my favorite book Marvel Comics is publishing right now, probably. It's excellent, and if you're not reading it, you absolutely should. I got the first volume in trade paperback, and I'm reading the rest in singles. Daredevil Redemption, this is pretty decent. Daredevil Father, you can skip that. You can skip that. It's a Quesada book, and it's not particularly great. Ultimate Daredevil and Elektra, this is a recommend for me. It's different, that's for sure, but it's like, it's interesting and it's got heart. Now this is Daughters of the Dragons. This is a digital series, and it's signed by author Jed MacKay, and it's really cool. And this is the first time it's been printed in trade, so if you can find it, maybe get that, because it's a sort of interesting case. 2 volumes of like really old Doctor Strange. This is really good and psychedelic and awesome. I recommend this. And next we have Fantastic Four Secret Invasion. We have Fantastic Four by Hickman, which is obviously like all-time classic Fantastic Four material. My camera's having trouble focusing a little bit. Matt Fraction's Fantastic Four. Dan Slott's Fantastic Four. This is a series I'm also really enjoying right now. I'm reading it in singles. Ultimate Fantastic Four. This is good material. This is all quite good. I hate the Marvel Zombies, like, with all of my heart and being, but their appearance in Ultimate Fantastic Four is pretty good, because it's just like a brief window. We don't get to spend time with them or anything. It's just like a fun concept. But the series by Kirkman is, I'm not a fan, suffice it to say. Ghost Rider Essential Girl Comics. It was $1. So, this is my couple Marvel Universe Hulk figures, 3 3/4 inches. There's Essential Hulk. This is interesting stuff. You don't have to read it. Strong recommendation for Immortal Hulk, or at least the first few volumes of that, the first couple volumes. That's really interesting, and it's doing some really cool stuff with Hulk that I never would have guessed would be a thing. Infinity Gauntlet, one of the quintessential Marvel events. Read that. Then I have the complete run of Matt Fraction's Iron Fist, and I love Iron Fist, so I want to get into that. Read a lot of classic Iron Fist stuff, Heroes for Hire, that sort of thing. But I haven't read this yet, so I'll get into that within due time. And then there's Iron Fist by Ed Bryson, who I met and is awesome and signed this book for me. And he's writing Ghost Rider right now, which I understand is quite good. I'm in trouble there. This is Iron Man, Essential Iron Man Volume 1. I totally recommend this. This is, if you, I recommend this to anyone who's interested in, like, classic Iron Man books, because it's much cheaper than buying them, obviously. I do know somebody who had a complete run of Invincible Iron Man and Tales of Suspense and stuff, which is insane to me. But, yeah, this is really cool. Then we have Infamous Iron Man. This is really cool as well. This is by Bendis. It drops off a little bit at the end, but it's an interesting ride, and it's a great exploration of the Doom character for the most part. And we have the complete run of Luke Cage, Power Man. This is awesome material. I love, like, old Iron Fist and Luke Cage comics. This is issues 1 through 49 plus annual number 1, because at number 50 would become Power Man and Iron Fist Heroes for Hire, rather than just Luke Cage Hero for Hire. And I have Tom DeFalco's Machine Man. This is the first appearance of Iron Man 2020, who's made a resurgence recently. First 2 volumes of Essential Moon Knight. I love Moon Knight, so I can't wait for the next Netflix series, and I recommend reading Moon Knight because he's awesome. Now we get on the Spider-Man stuff. Whew. I'll try to get through this as quickly as possible because I've talked about a lot of this material before. But we have the first 2 volumes of Spider-Man Epic Collection. This is Great Power and Great Responsibility. This is issues Amazing Fantasy 15 through issues 28 or 30 or something like that of Amazing Spider-Man. And so this is the whole Lee Ditko run of Amazing Spider-Man, Quintessential Spider-Man. You should absolutely read this if you're a Spider-Man fan. It's great, and it's classic, and it's dated vernacular, but it's still really good if you can look past that. This is Spider-Man No More. I did not have this as of the last video, the last graphic novel collection. This is the 3rd volume. This is this collects everything from 66 to 67, I believe. This is when John Romita Sr. would join the book, and obviously he's one of the awesome, most essential, quintessential Spider-Man artists of all time. That's an excellent book. I recommend that. This is when Peter Parker really gets into his college years. He starts college here, but this is when you meet, like, the crew. This is when you meet Harry Osborn and Mary Jane and stuff like that. This is Goblin's Last Stand / The Death of Gwen Stacy. This is out of print, but if you can find it, you should grab it because it's incredibly expensive on Amazon right now. See if I can fix the light a little bit. There you go. You should read this. It's good. Next we have Kraven's Last Hunt, also, like, timeless and classic and essential, by James D. Mateus, who's an excellent writer. And we have Round Robin, which is just a random volume, because I also have aspirations to collect every issue of Amazing Spider-Man. And I don't mean, like, in singles, but I want to have every issue of Amazing Spider-Man collected in either singles and trades, or, like, what variation thereof. Basically, I want to have in my library every issue of Spider-Man in one format or another. Next we go on to the JMS run, which is awesome and timeless and incredible. And it has beautiful art by John Romita Jr. for the first 2 volumes and a bit. And I completely and utterly recommend this series, with the exception of One More Day and Sins Past and Skin Deep. You can skip those ones. You could also skip the other. Actually, now that I think about it, aside from those couple of storylines there, everything else in this is, like, quintessential Spider-Man, and it's freaking fantastic. Next, we have Brand New Day, Volume 1. You can skip that. Craven's First Hunt, excellent. We have Spider-Man Worldwide by Dan Slott, Volume 1 through 5. You can skip this. It's there's some good stuff in there, but it's also like a lot of garbage. You get more clone shenanigans. Next, I have Volume 1 through 3 of Spider-Man by Nick Spencer. I'm currently reading it in singles. But yeah, Nick Spencer's Spider-Man is Volume 1 through 3. Excellent material. I totally recommend it. Spider-Geddon, it's another recommendation. Christoph Gage and Dan Slott and Jed McKay. Spider-Man and Deadpool isn't a romantic. Skip. That's just me. Web of Spider-Man, this is awesome stuff, by the way. Web of Spider-Man is underrated. Early Web of Spider-Man, at least. I don't. Later on, it gets into the same story arcs as everything else does. But this is a really interesting, more sort of street-level, fun-having Spider-Man. I totally recommend Web of Spider-Man. A bunch of volumes of Ultimate Spider-Man, that's just to fill in gaps in my collection. Death of Ultimate Spider-Man Fallout. The complete Miles Morales collection. I have every issue of Miles Morales in the Ultimate Universe. Volume 1 is collected here. And Volume 2 is collected in singles in my long box. Actually, I just reread Volume 2 of that. I finished it yesterday. This is a 12-issue series. I liked it, but it wasn't quite as good as I remember. It was interesting and engaging and suspenseful. But, like, it's, knowing the way it ends up is, it takes a lot of the impact out of it. But I can't say that for this. This is all excellent material. Ultimate Spider-Man is a freaking phenomenal series, and you should read it. You can skip this. This is Miles in 616, where he's unimportant and uninteresting. And I think he should go back to his own universe, where everything is cool and interesting. This is written by Stan Lee. This is the Spider-Man official movie adaptation. It's really good. Spider-Man Blue, quintessential Spider-Man. I read it every year. Thanos Wins. This is really cool. I recommend that. Ultimate Comics Thor. It's really weird. The Vision. I met one of the artists who drew this book, actually, Walsh, at Decaf in Halifax. And he drew issue 7, and he does a really good job at blending his style into the book. You don't really notice. Anyway, Vision is excellent, and I did it on my podcast, which you should listen to. But yeah, Vision's awesome. You should read that. Warlock by Jim Starlin, read that. Wolverine by Chris Claremont, read that. I haven't read this yet. You can skip Classic X-Men. I figure you can skip X-Men until the new cast appears, until like the modern cast appears in Giant Size number 1. There's some good stuff in here, don't get me wrong. I don't mean to demean Classic X-Men, but it's kind of boring. A lot of times it meanders. X-Men Days of Future Past, that's obviously essential and classic. This is the Grant Morrison run of X-Men, which I like a lot. Uncanny X-Men Quarantine by Matt Fraction. Wolverine in the X-Men Alpha and Omega. I haven't read that yet. I just got that the other day. Ultimate X-Men Volume 1. You should read Ultimate X-Men at least a little bit. If it's not for you, I totally understand, but I think it's pretty interesting. Animal Man by Jeff Lemire. Batman Year One by Frank Miller. Obviously classic and essential and timeless and all that good stuff. Bruce Wayne Fugitive. This is interesting. You don't have to read this. Black Mirror. That's pretty... I feel like most people consider this a pretty big classic in recent Batman history. This is when Dick Grayson was Batman. I really enjoyed this era. And I was reading the Batman and Robin series as it came out, written by, was it Grant Morrison, I believe, at the time. And that was really interesting and good. And I liked that a lot. I just like Dick Grayson as a character, and I liked him as Batman. This is pretty decent, the first volume. You can skip this. Tom King's Batman's a real mixed bag for me. Some of it I really like, some of it I just find incredibly boring and meandering. The Detective Comics number 1000, that's really cool. Batman Last Night on Earth, which is freaking delayed as all hell. Dead Man, Doom Patrol by Grant Morrison. This is an interesting book. Flash. This is pretty decent. I want to get more of this because it's out of print. It's really hard to get a hold of, but I like Flash a lot, and the New 52 run of Flash is pretty interesting. Green Lantern by Kyle Rayner. Kyle Rayner's easily one of my favorite Green Lanterns. I love Kyle Rayner. He's interesting and fresh and bold and all that. Green Lantern Rebirth by Jeff Johns. Green Lantern No Fear by Jeff Johns. Green Lantern Blackest Night by Jeff Johns. I don't think I have to say anything about the Green Lantern Jeff Johns run. Jeff Johns is an excellent writer, and he can write the hell out of Green Lantern. Then I have more Kyle Rayner stuff, Green Lantern New Guardians. This is all quite interesting. I like it a lot. If you don't know anything about the larger DC universe or Green Lantern, I don't recommend it, because you'll be like, what am I reading? I don't know what any of this is. But I recommend this to any Green Lantern fan of Kyle Rayner, certainly. Justice League New World Order and Justice League That Was Now, This Is Then. Try to hurry along a little bit because we're using up quite a bit of time here. This is Infinite Crisis by Jeff Johns. I haven't read this yet. It's been sitting on my shelf for ages. For some reason, I just haven't brought myself to read it. This is Nightwing Bloodhaven by Denny O'Neil. This is excellent, and Chuck Dixon as well. This is really good. I totally recommend this. I love Nightwing, and I love this era of Nightwing. You should read that. Classic Teen Titans stuff. Teen Titans by Marv Wolfman and George Perez. This is obviously timeless and classic. Or I don't know if it's necessarily timeless, but it's definitely classic. And I have a bunch of this in floppies. I can't wait to dig into the collected editions properly. Teen Titans by Jeff Johns. This is really good. Supergirl, if you haven't read 50 Superman and Supergirl and stuff, I recommend it. It's goofy and ridiculous and awesome. You can skip this. Superman Panic in the Sky. Superman Smallville Season 11. I haven't read this yet, but I'm excited to. Alan Moore, writing for comics. Deep Sea, Irredeemable Volumes 1 and 2. Paper Girls, Rat Queens, Sagas Volume 1 through 3, Walking Dead Volume 1 and 2, the Valiant Era Collection. I recommend this if you're interested in, like, comic books of the time. If you're interested in that era of comic books and their indie comics and that sort of thing. Understanding Comics, The Invisible Art, and we have Ouija, which is written by a local writer from Halifax, or from the Nova Scotia area at least. This is really interesting. I learned a lot about a person I didn't know anything about, because this book inspired me to do more research on the actual person behind the concept here. So I recommend that if you can get a hold of it somewhere. Life Sucks, haven't read it. John Carpenter, The Gods of Mars. Spidey, freshman year. I like the first issue of this book, and I like elements of this book, but it's just a little too childish and silly for me. It's not for me, but it's drawn by Nick Bradshaw, and he's good. Jeff Smith's Bone. That's a good series from the 90s. It's just some random... No, I have Batman the Warriors back there. You can't see that. But that's basically all the Batman material printed during World War II. That's an interesting read. This Flash here, just stand him up. I'll get him later. And I've got a bunch of other novels and stuff. I have a bunch of comic book novels over on the shelf on the other side of my room, over by like my gaming stuff. But I won't go through all that. Yeah, I recommend this. This is really good. This is a retelling of the Stone Tablet Saga. I recommend this. This is by Peter David. It really expands the story of the films. I recommend this. This is Hostile Takeover. This is a prelude to the Spider-Man PS4 game. This is an excellent novel. I like it a lot. Goblin Moon by Kurt Busiek. This is also good. I haven't read this yet. Half of this is really good, and half of this is really weird and kind of off-putting. This is Miles Morales' Spider-Man. I love the interpersonal character stuff. It's non-canon, by the way, so it doesn't matter. I love the interpersonal character stuff. I don't like the weird supernatural elements of it at all. Fantastic Four to Free Atlantis, that's a pretty good book. I haven't read this. I haven't read that. I haven't read this. But yeah. So that's pretty much it. I'll end it here because we've been going for like 40 minutes almost at this point. What you're about to see after this clip, my manga collection and my wizard collection clip, and that's a few minutes. So yeah, somewhere around 40 minutes by the time this video is over. So I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting my channel, and I'll see you in a second with the one more thing. I have this stuff that I always forget about because I don't put it on my shelf anymore. This is good stuff. I've had a lot of this since I was a kid. X-Men First Class. This is awesome, and I loved it as a kid. I read it over and over and over. Wolverine Unleashed, some classic reprints of Wolverine stories, and Spider-Man Black and Blue has some classic Spider-Man reprinted in it. Anyway, those books. Should probably put those in there so they don't get bent. Yeah. Anyway, so I'll see you over in the manga collection. So over here, it's kind of high up. It's a little hard to get to. But up here, I've got my collection of like old wizards. There's a few of those there. I think there's like 6 or 7 of them. It's my collection of Marvel Vision magazine, which is basically like Wizard magazine, only it was just about Marvel. And that's pretty cool too. I love having little snapshots of like the state of comics back in the day and whatnot. And the interviews are great. There's some great original artwork in these books, and they're just fun snapshots. And I read a little bit of Wizard when I was a kid, you know, so it's a little bit nostalgic as well. There's some manga here. I don't read very much manga, as you could probably tell. I read a bit of manga from library. I do have more manga than this somewhere, but I'm not going to dig it out. I read a little bit of manga from libraries, and like my friends' collections and stuff like that. But I haven't done that in a while either. I'm just not a huge manga. I love Death Note. Death Note's awesome. I want to read more manga. I just don't have like, I don't have the budget. It's not that it's very expensive, but I don't have the budget for that and comics and everything else I collect. So that's why my manga collection's not very big. I'd like to read more manga though. So if you have any like suggestions for like detective manga or like horror manga, those are kind of my 2 favorite genres of manga. Is like psychological horror and or just horror in general and detective type manga. That would be swell, and I'll look into that.